Although Red Bull are still the team to beat, there is no doubt that since the start of the season, Ferrari and McLaren have definitely closed the gap. Now, I think it would be wrong to simply say that it's been a linear progression because prior to Miami, the gap between Max and the next non-Red Bull was 22.4 seconds in Bahrain, 18.6 seconds in Jeddah, 20.8 seconds in Japan, and then still 13.7 seconds in China. Since Miami, however, where McLaren introduced their first big upgrade package on Lando's car and then a partial upgrade on Oscar's, not only has Checo struggled to beat either Ferrari or McLaren, but Max has also been put under a lot more pressure and hasn't been able to drive away like we've seen in the past. All four of McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes and Aston Martin have all had moments where it's looked like if they could continue to build on their momentum, that maybe they could be the ones to beat Red Bull. However, over the winter break and now looking into the season, it's very clear that Ferrari and McLaren have now set themselves apart when it comes to understanding these rules and being able to build competitive cars that can almost now compete with Red Bull on a consistent basis. Aston Martin, since their great start in 2023, have really struggled to develop their cars, and Mercedes are still struggling to understand their car going into the weekend. McLaren and Ferrari, I think most fans would agree, seem like the most likely to be challenging and potentially beating Max and Red Bull in the future. But given how close they've been so far, it creates the tantalizing question of which one would you choose to be a part of, and which one do you think will have more success for not just 2025, but then into the new regulations in 2026 and beyond. On the driver front, this is probably the area that I have the least to say about because each team from next year onwards is going to have at least one World Championship caliber driver, if not two. Over at McLaren, whilst luck was definitely an element in Lando's first win, the fact that he literally drove away from Max after the safety car restart and didn't even give him a chance to overtake proved once and for all that when there is a win on the table, Lando Norris is more than capable of standing up to that kind of pressure and beating Max. As far as Oscar, I actually think that he's been really unlucky over the past couple of races, and I don't think that the current points tally compared to his teammate is a fair representation of how much he's improved and how close he really is. I honestly think that had a few things gone his way, like the safety car not coming out in Miami, and then the team not warning him too late, which led to a 5-place grid drop in Imola, I think he could have had back-to-back second-place finishes. Whilst I do think he still lacks a bit of race pace relative to Lando, there is no denying that he definitely has the ability to be a pole sitter and also a race winner. As a combination, I think McLaren have an amazing driver lineup, and if they somehow fail to win a championship in the next 2 or 3 years, I don't think it's going to be because their drivers aren't good enough. When it comes to Ferrari, I think that point becomes even stronger because with Leclerc and Hamilton, there isn't exactly a shortage of talent or championship pedigree. Granted, I don't think Lewis is having the best season in his career so far, but at the same time, when you look at the championship table, both he and George are ahead of Fernando in the Aston Martin, and then behind both McLarens and Ferraris. And that's just where Mercedes are right now. After his podium in the sprint in China, I have no doubt that Lewis still has the ability and the drive to be a world champion, and I am very much looking forward to seeing how he and Leclerc will work as a combination from 2025 onwards. Something that I really like about both of these teams is that despite how close they are on track and all of the similarities that they share in trying to be the next championship winning team, the main people running the teams and the structures around them couldn't be more different. Ferrari, I would say, is perhaps the most traditional. When it comes to their owner John Elkann and their CEO Benedetto Vigna, whilst we occasionally see them attend some of the races in the back of the garage, for the most part they stay in the background and let the race team function with plenty of autonomy. Frederic Vasseur as the team principal is the main man at the very top of the race team, and then below him his technical side is comprised of Enrico Cardile, who's the technical director in charge of chassis and aero, and then Enrico Gualtieri, who's in charge of the power unit. Starting from October and coming over from Mercedes with Lewis, the team has also added ex-F1 driver Jerome D'Ambrosio, who will be deputy team principal and will be in charge of Ferrari's Young Driver Academy, and more importantly, Loic Serra, who'll be head of chassis performance and working under Car Deal. And now, of course, the rumors of Adrian Newey joining Ferrari has been a source of massive speculation, and at this point that's all I can really treat it as: rumors and speculation. Were he to actually join for 2025, he wouldn't necessarily displace anyone that's already there, and I'd imagine he'd have a pretty similar role to the one that he has at Red Bull, which is simply as a glorified consultant with the main technical director. Over at McLaren, the structure is anything but traditional. Zak Brown as the CEO is directly involved with the race team alongside Andrea Stella as the team principal, and since the start of the season there has been some pretty major changes. To start the year, the team actually had 3 technical directors after bringing in Rob Marshall from Red Bull and David Sanchez from Ferrari. And now, after only 3 months at McLaren, David Sanchez actually left his role in what the team called an amicable split, with Stella explaining his exit as, "We had conversations with David about this topic, and we realized and acknowledged that his level of seniority, expertise and competence is potentially even more senior than the role that he had at McLaren." After this exit, the team has had to reshuffle some of their personnel, and as of now, we still have Zak Brown and Andrea Stella at the very top. Rob Marshall has now been moved over to chief designer, Neil Haldy takes over his old role as TD of engineering, Peter Prodromou remains as TD of aerodynamics, and in the interim, Andrea Stella is not only the team principal, but also takes up Sanchez's old role as TD of performance. And now, to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw yet more small changes later in the season to help alleviate Stella from his technical role so that he can focus solely on running the team. But having said that, looking at the strong gains that McLaren have made with their upgrades, which would have been in the pipeline for months, it clearly shows that the foundations of their technical department is as strong as ever, and that this little reshuffle hasn't diminished the team's performance. On the subject of the team principals, what's also been quite interesting is how both Stella and Vasseur are very different characters off the track. Stella has always had quite a serious demeanour, whilst Vasseur is definitely one of the jokers of the paddock. However, when it's time to get down to business, both are extremely blunt and haven't been afraid to make big decisions, make big changes, or say what needs to be said, even if it means criticising their own drivers or their own team. What's also been quite interesting is how the individual background of each person has influenced how they've gone about to improve their own team. Stella's background is on the technical side, having worked as an engineer and then a trackside race engineer with drivers like Schumacher, Raikkonen and Alonso. That is why, since becoming team principal, his focus has been on strengthening the team's technical department and making sure that all of the processes are getting the best out of every single person, even if it means creating a non-traditional technical structure. Over at Ferrari, whilst Vasseur has also had a technical background, very early on in his career he went into team management, and that is why his biggest impact has been to make Ferrari more methodical and less erratic. Let's not forget that just a few years ago, Ferrari were a laughingstock on an operational side. Inconsistent pit stops, chaotic radio messages, and strategy decisions that all in combination made the driver's job even more stressful in the car compared to what Max was experiencing at Red Bull. Vasseur has completely changed the team's working methodology. Even the recent move to replace Leclerc's race engineer Xavi shows that regardless of how long you've been there, Fred is not afraid to make big decisions. He has instilled a calmer and more methodical environment at Ferrari, and on the pit stop side, it's no surprise that if you look at the DHL rankings which track all of the pit stops, although Red Bull is still the benchmark in Formula 1, so far this season the two teams that are right behind them are Ferrari and McLaren. Within the past year and a half, both of these teams have been completely transformed with brand new team principals, major technical personnel both leaving and being brought in, and then major driver changes as well. Norris, Piastri and Leclerc have all been convinced by the projects and have all been tied down with long-term contracts, and then of course Ferrari dropped the biggest bombshell by managing to sign Lewis Hamilton away from Mercedes before the season had even begun, which shows a huge amount of faith from Lewis. And all of this has been done to get everyone ready and settled for the new regulations in 2026. So far this season, the development battle has shifted the momentum between these two teams. There's no doubt that right out of the box, the Ferrari looked to be Red Bull's closest challenger, and that actually surprised me because unlike McLaren, who have continued to develop their concept from last year, Ferrari came into this season with an all-new concept aimed at improving their tyre wear and limiting the sudden loss of aero in high-speed corners that made last year's car so tricky to drive on the limit. Having said that, what continues to amaze me about McLaren is that every single time they put on a big upgrade package, or even a partial upgrade package like with Piastri in Miami, it seems to have an immediate impact on their performance, which shows that what the team is seeing in its simulations is then correlating with the actual performance on the track. In Imola, Ferrari brought their first upgrade of the season, and whilst going in, the team made a point to stress that it wasn't going to be a dramatic improvement to the car. I still think that they expected a little bit more than what it actually delivered, as they were still a few tenths behind McLaren in qualifying, and then couldn't match the tremendous race pace of Lando Norris. Post-race, Leclerc and the team emphasized that perhaps more setup work will need to be done to get the best out of the current package, and they also hinted at some track-specific power unit losses which hurt them on the straights. This development battle is going to keep being one of the biggest talking points throughout the season, and as things stand heading into Monaco, Ferrari is still ahead of McLaren in both the Constructors' and Drivers' Championship with Leclerc. Momentum makes a massive difference to the public perception because whilst right now it looks like McLaren are going to have a stronger season and might be the stronger bet, if I had asked this question after Sainz won in Australia, then the answer probably would have been Ferrari. As always, I am very interested to see what my subscribers have to say, and so over on Twitter I asked, which out of McLaren or Ferrari would you choose to join for the next few years? After 1,537 votes, Ferrari just beat out McLaren with 52.6% of the vote, but just as I thought, it was basically a coin flip which I think represents exactly what I've been talking about in terms of how hard it is to choose right now between both of these two teams. Looking ahead, however, if McLaren can continue to outdevelop Ferrari this season and can then carry that into 2025, then there's no reason why they can't at least challenge Red Bull, especially with Lando Norris now being a race winner. However, the bigger picture is from 2026 onwards. The current regulations around the power units have been stable for long enough that there isn't that much of a difference between all of the different power units, and that is why McLaren as a customer can easily outperform the Mercedes Works team. In 2026, the major change is that the combustion and electrical output is going to be a 50-50 split, which represents a massive technical challenge for all of the power unit manufacturers. And now, in anticipation of this, Zak Brown did do his due diligence. In early 2023, he visited the Red Bull Powertrains facility with Horner and also reached out to Honda for a possible reunion, although in the end McLaren decided to extend their partnership with Mercedes until 2030. And now, aerodynamics is always going to be important, and even in 26 there's potentially going to be active aero. But make no mistake, just like in 2014 we are going into an engine formula, and even if hypothetically there isn't any disadvantages whatsoever to being a customer team, McLaren's fate is slightly out of their hands and dependent on Mercedes nailing the next set of engine regulations. Over at Ferrari, given that Sauber will become Audi and will use their own power unit, only Haas will be left using Ferrari power. And now some might see this as a disadvantage because less customers means less money and less data for you to improve your own power unit. But the point is that Ferrari will have 100% control of their own destiny and have full integration with the chassis and power unit from day one. For 2025, I could genuinely see McLaren being the more successful team and potentially even winning the World Championship. I don't think that we can just take that off the table. But from 2026 onwards, it's all about your personal beliefs as to whether you trust that Mercedes will nail the engine regulations and that you're not going to be at a disadvantage as a customer. That is why it's going to be so interesting to look back in 2 or 3 years' time as to which of these teams will have achieved more success. Because as things stand right now, whilst I do think that it is a total coin flip, I'd still weigh the Ferrari side of the coin a little bit more. But as always, I want to know your thoughts in the comments below. If you wanted to win the World Championship, which of these teams would you choose to join for the next 2 or 3 years? Well, there you have it. If you did enjoy this video and want to support the channel, then don't forget to subscribe. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.